The river had always been surrounded by whispers of mystery and fear. Elders spoke of it as a sacred place, a divider between the world of the living and the unknown. Stories passed down through generations warned that anyone found floating in its waters was either a gift from the gods or a harbinger of doom. Some spoke of lost souls, cursed to wander between realms, while others believed the river chose whom it would carry, deciding their fate long before they even set foot in its waters. Prince Okai had heard these tales since childhood, but he had never paid them much mind. As the future ruler of his kingdom, he valued logic over superstition. That evening, he rode through the dense forests near the river, his guards following closely behind. The hunt had been unsuccessful, the prey elusive, and the air carried an unnatural stillness. Even the birds, usually loud in the canopy, had fallen silent. Something caught his eye near the riverbank, a pale figure drifting in the water, unmoving. He reined in his horse and dismounted, moving closer. The moonlight reflected off the surface, making the figure glow as if it were made of light itself. His men hesitated behind him, their faces betraying unease. The eldest of his guards, a man who had served the royal family for decades, stepped forward and placed a hand on his arm. "My prince, we must not interfere," he said in a hushed voice. "The river chooses. To pull one from its waters is to challenge its will." Prince Okai ignored him. He moved swiftly, stepping into the cold water, his boots sinking into the soft riverbed. The current was deceptively strong, tugging at him as he reached out. The woman's body was light, fragile in his grasp. Her garments were torn, as if she'd been through something violent, yet her face was untouched, serene even in unconsciousness. Long strands of her wet hair clung to her cheeks, and her lips were slightly parted, as if she had been about to whisper something before the water claimed her. Lifting her into his arms, he turned back toward the shore. The moment her body left the river, a sudden gust of wind rushed through the trees, bending branches and sending ripples across the water's surface. The horses neighed in distress, their fear spreading to the men. The elder guard murmured a silent prayer, his expression grim. "We should leave her here," another soldier muttered, shifting uneasily. "She could be one of them." Prince Okai shot him a sharp look. "She is a woman in need of help, that is all." No one dared to argue further. As they rode back to the palace, the wind died down, and the forest remained eerily quiet. The prince kept his eyes on the road ahead, but something in the back of his mind whispered that his decision had set something in motion, something far beyond his understanding. The woman lay motionless in Prince Okai's arms as he rode through the dense forest toward the palace. Her skin was cool to the touch, her breath faint but steady. The moonlight illuminated the delicate patterns on her strange jewelry, gold and silver intertwined in symbols he did not recognize, unlike anything worn by the women of his kingdom. The way the metal shimmered in the dim light gave the unsettling illusion that the jewelry pulsed, as if alive with unseen energy. His men rode behind him in tense silence, their eyes darting toward the unconscious woman every few moments. They had seen the way the river had reacted when she was pulled from its grasp, the wind that had howled through the trees, the unnatural stillness that followed. It was as if the very air around them had shifted. "My prince," the elder guard whispered, urging his horse forward. "This is unwise. If she is one of the river spirits, bringing her to the palace may—" "She is a woman, not a spirit," Okai interrupted, his voice firm. "She breathes, she bleeds. If the river meant to claim her, it has lost its right." The guard fell silent, but the unease among the men remained. By the time they reached the palace gates, the night air had grown heavy, thick with something indescribable. The guards at the entrance hesitated when they saw the prince carrying an unfamiliar woman, their hands instinctively tightening around the hilts of their weapons. With a single glance, Okai dismissed their concerns and strode inside, his heartbeat steady, but his mind clouded with unanswered questions. The royal healer was summoned at once. An elderly woman with eyes that had seen more than most, she approached the unconscious figure with careful reverence. She touched the woman's forehead, then traced a finger over her hands, her frown deepening as she examined the strange jewelry. The healer pressed her palm lightly over the woman's chest, feeling for the rhythm of her heart. "She is neither dead nor fully alive," the healer murmured after a long silence. Prince Okai narrowed his eyes. "What does that mean?" The healer looked at him, her face unreadable. "It means she is somewhere in between. Not in our world, not yet beyond it. Something holds her here, something I do not understand." The words sent a cold shiver through the room. One of the prince's men muttered a quiet prayer under his breath. The elder guard shifted uncomfortably. "She has no wounds," the healer continued, "yet she does not wake. Her body is unbroken, yet her spirit is caught in something unseen. This is not natural, my prince." Prince Okai exhaled, resisting the creeping unease that threatened to take hold of him. He had seen many things in his lifetime: battles, treachery, the cruelty of men. But this felt different. He turned to the guards. "She will remain under the care of the healer. No one is to touch her or remove her jewelry until we understand what afflicts her." The guards hesitated, but nodded. That night, an eerie stillness settled over the palace. The usual hum of nighttime sounds, the distant calls of nocturnal birds, the rustling of trees, had disappeared. It was as if the world itself had paused, holding its breath. Then, the whispers began. Faint at first, just at the edge of hearing. A murmur in the wind, words unrecognizable, yet laced with an undeniable presence. The torches lining the palace corridors flickered violently, though there was no wind to disturb them. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, shifting even when no one moved. In his chambers, Prince Okai sat awake, the weight of the night pressing against him. He had fought against enemies with swords and shields. But this was different. He could not fight what he could not see. The healer remained by the woman's side, her aged hands resting lightly on the girl's wrist, feeling the faint pulse beneath. Her brows furrowed as she whispered an ancient incantation under her breath, hoping to stir whatever force lay dormant within the stranger. Then, for the first time since she was pulled from the river, the woman's lips parted. A single breath escaped her, soft, almost soundless. And then, in a voice that did not belong to her, she spoke. She was never meant to leave. For 3 days, the palace remained tense. The mysterious woman lay unmoving in the royal chambers, her breath shallow but steady. Servants whispered about the strangeness of her survival, about the river's curse, about the way the air in the palace felt different since she arrived. Some refused to go near her room at night, claiming they heard faint murmurs from within, though no one had stepped inside. On the morning of the 3rd day, just as the first rays of sunlight painted the sky in golden hues, the woman's fingers twitched. A sharp breath rushed into her lungs, her chest rising and falling, as if she had been drowning in something unseen. And then, her eyes fluttered open. She sat up slowly, her dark eyes darting around in confusion. The chamber was unfamiliar, walls draped in silk, golden ornaments gleaming in the morning light. She pressed a hand to her chest, her heart pounding. Who was she? Why was she here? The moment she tried to grasp onto a memory, she found only emptiness. The door creaked open, and a palace maiden gasped, "She is awake!" Within moments, the room filled with people, maids, guards, and finally, Prince Okai himself. His gaze locked onto hers, and for a brief moment, neither of them spoke. She was breathtaking, even in her disoriented state. Her deep brown skin glowed in the sunlight, her dark curls spilling over her shoulders. There was something almost unearthly about her presence, something that made it impossible to look away. Prince Okai stepped closer, studying her face. "Do you know who you are?" She opened her mouth, hesitated, and then shook her head. I don't remember. Her voice was soft, uncertain. A silence fell over the room. The palace staff exchanged uneasy glances. A woman who appeared from nowhere, with no past, no name. The omens were strong, and they were rarely in favor of such mysteries. Soon, the king and queen arrived. They studied the woman carefully, their expressions unreadable. "You do not recall your name?" the queen asked. The woman lowered her gaze, shaking her head. "Nothing." The king turned to his council. "What do you make of this?" An elder, a man whose hair had turned white with age, stepped forward. His eyes held wisdom, but also fear. "There are old tales, my king, of spirits who take the form of lost souls. The river is sacred, but it is also dangerous. Some say that when it gives, it does not do so without taking something in return." The queen's face paled. "Are you suggesting she is not human?" "I am saying we must be careful," the elder replied gravely. "She could be a spy from another land. She could be a noblewoman who has fled from danger. Or," his voice lowered, "she could be a daughter of the river." A chill ran through the room. Everyone had heard of the legend. The daughters of the river were spirits, beautiful, elusive, and powerful. It was said they brought both blessings and curses, depending on why they had come. Prince Okai exhaled sharply. "She is no spirit," he said firmly. "She is flesh and blood. Whatever past she has lost, it does not make her dangerous." His gaze softened as he looked at her again. "She deserves a name." The queen glanced at her son, then at the woman. The girl's face remained unreadable, her lost past hovering over her like an unseen shadow. "What would you call her?" the queen asked. Prince Okai thought for a moment, then spoke. "Nyara." The word echoed through the chamber. The elder raised an eyebrow. "The forgotten one." The prince nodded. "She has no past to claim, no name to remember. Until she finds her truth, she will be Nyara." Nyara. The name settled on her lips, foreign yet familiar. She whispered it softly, as if testing it. Nyara. Though the king and queen exchanged uneasy glances, they did not argue. What was done was done. The girl from the river had a name. That night, as the palace maidens dressed her in royal garments, they marveled at her beauty. "A spirit or not," one of them whispered, "she looks like a queen." Nyara stared at her reflection in the polished bronze mirror. The silk clung to her body like water, the golden embroidery glowing against her skin. She looked regal, elegant, yet unfamiliar. It was as if she were gazing at a stranger, a silent past, a borrowed name, and an uncertain future. The whispers grew louder with each passing day. Servants avoided meeting Nyara's gaze, their hands trembling as they poured her water or laid out her clothes. The guards watched her with wary eyes, their hands always near their swords. Even the noblewomen who once marveled at her beauty now kept their distance, speaking in hushed tones about the girl who had no past. Some called her a blessing, a rare gift from the gods, meant to bring prosperity to the kingdom. Others believed she was a curse, an omen of destruction disguised in human form. The tension reached its peak when the high priest, a man of great influence and deep faith, stepped before the king and queen. His face was shadowed with concern. "Your Majesties, the gods do not allow mysteries to dwell among us. We must know if this girl is truly of this world, or if she has been sent to deceive us." The queen's lips pressed into a thin line. "What do you propose, High Priest?" "A test," the priest said, his voice firm. "She must walk upon sacred ground. If the gods accept her, she may stay. If they reject her, we will know she is not meant to be among us." Murmurs filled the throne room. The sacred ground was the temple's inner sanctum, a place where only the purest souls could walk without consequence. If she were truly divine, the gods would show favor. If she were not— The king turned to Prince Okai, his expression unreadable. "What do you say, my son?" Prince Okai's jaw tightened. He hated the way they spoke about Niara, as if she were a threat, an object to be tested rather than a person. But he knew the fears of the people would not fade unless she proved herself. He looked at Niara. "Do you agree to this?" Niara had no memory of where she came from, but something inside her told her that the test was important, not just for the people, but for herself. Maybe it would help her understand who she was. Maybe it would bring back what she had lost. "I will do it," she said. The temple was surrounded by hundreds of onlookers, their faces a mixture of curiosity, fear, and hope. The sacred ground, a large circle of polished stone in the heart of the temple, shimmered under the midday sun. It was said that those who were unworthy would feel their feet burn upon touching it, while the chosen ones would walk unharmed. Niara took a deep breath and stepped forward. The moment her foot touched the stone, the sky above darkened. The sun disappeared behind thick, swirling clouds. A gust of wind tore through the temple courtyard, sending people staggering back. Then, the first crack of thunder split the air, followed by a flash of lightning that struck just beyond the temple walls. Screams erupted as people fell to their knees, hands raised in desperate prayer. Some believed the gods were rejecting her. Others thought she had awakened something far greater than they could understand. Niara's breath hitched as a sudden dizziness overtook her. Her vision blurred, and then, flashes, a roaring river, hands reaching for her, a voice calling her name, Niara. No, it was something else, something older. A golden mask sinking beneath the water's surface, a pair of glowing eyes staring at her from the depths. The vision faded as quickly as it came, leaving her gasping. The storm, as if tied to her heartbeat, ceased just as suddenly. The sky cleared, the sun returning as if nothing had happened. Silence fell over the temple. The people did not know whether to bow in reverence or flee in terror. The high priest's face was pale. She has been touched by forces beyond us. Prince Okai rushed to Niara's side, steadying her as she swayed on her feet. "Are you all right?" Niara's mind was spinning. She had seen something. Fragments of a past she did not remember, of a truth she could not yet grasp. "I don't know," she whispered. But one thing was certain. Whoever she was not just an ordinary girl. The nights in the palace had grown restless for Niara. At first, it was just a feeling, a strange pull whenever she passed the garden's fountains or heard the soft trickle of water in the royal baths. But soon, the whispers began. They called her name, soft, distant, like an echo travelling through time. Niara. She would wake in the middle of the night, her heart pounding, sweat lining her brow. The whispers always seemed to come from the palace gardens, and tonight, she could no longer ignore them. Barefoot and wrapped in a silk shawl, she slipped past the sleeping guards and into the gardens. The moon was high, casting silver light upon the quiet pools of water. The scent of blooming night lilies filled the air, but beneath it, something else lingered. A damp, earthy scent, like rain on old stone. Niara stepped toward the central fountain, where crystal-clear water flowed into a wide basin. The surface was smooth, undisturbed. Yet, as she leaned in, her breath caught in her throat. The reflection staring back at her was not her own. It was a woman with eyes that shimmered like the river under the sun. Her hair was long and wild, strands twisting like currents in the wind. She was familiar, yet entirely unknown. The woman in the water parted her lips, and when she spoke, the voice was the same one that had been calling Niara for days. "You must remember before it's too late." A chill ran through Niara's spine. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the water, but the moment her fingertips touched the surface, a rush of memories surged through her like a breaking wave. She saw fire, a village engulfed in flames, people running, screaming. She saw herself, or the girl she used to be, standing in the midst of it all, clutching something close to her chest. And then, a shadow. A towering, faceless figure moving toward her. Niara gasped and stumbled back, the vision shattering like glass. Her knees buckled, and she would have fallen if strong arms hadn't caught her. "Niara!" Prince Okai's voice was urgent, his grip firm but careful. He had found her. She clutched his tunic, struggling to steady her breath. The terror from the vision still clung to her like cold water. "What happened?" he asked, his dark eyes scanning her pale face. "Why are you out here alone?" Niara opened her mouth, but her throat felt dry. The words didn't come easily. She glanced at the fountain, but the water was still now. Just her own reflection stared back. "I saw something," she finally managed. "A woman. She told me to remember. And then I saw fire. A village burning." Prince Okai's expression darkened. He led her to a nearby stone bench and sat beside her. "You're remembering your past?" "I think so." Her fingers curled into her lap. "But it doesn't make sense. Why was the village burning? Who was that shadow?" Prince Okai hesitated before saying, "The answers might not be easy, Niara. But we will find them together." His voice was steady, reassuring, and for the first time since she had woken in the palace, Niara felt that she was not entirely lost. But deep inside, she knew the truth was waiting for her, and whatever it was coming closer. The arrival of the travelers caused a stir in the palace. They were a group of merchants and nomads, their clothes worn from long journeys, their camels laden with rare goods. Among them was an old woman, her back slightly bent with age, but her eyes sharp as a hawk's. Niara had been standing in the courtyard with Prince Okai when the woman saw her. The moment their eyes met, the woman let out a strangled gasp, her walking staff slipping from her hands. "It cannot be," she whispered, stepping forward with trembling hands. "Princess Zuberi?" The title sent a shockwave through the air. The murmurs of the court grew louder. Prince Okai stiffened beside Niara. Niara's heartbeat pounded in her ears. "What did you call me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The old woman fell to her knees. "You are her, the lost daughter of the Zuberi kingdom." Gasps spread among the nobles. The king and queen, who had been observing the travelers from their balcony, descended with urgency. "Who are you, old woman?" the king demanded. "My name is Binta," the woman replied, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "I was a servant in the palace of the Zuberi kingdom before it was burned to the ground 10 years ago. I watched the royal family fall one by one, but the princess, the young heir, was never found. Until now." Niara felt lightheaded. The ground beneath her seemed to sway. She clutched Prince Okai's arm for support. This cannot be," the queen murmured. "If she is truly Princess Zuberi, then she is the rightful heir to a kingdom that no longer exists." But that was not the only question lingering in the air. If she was truly a princess, why was she found in the river? Who had tried to kill her? As if summoned by the weight of her name, Niara's memories surged back like a flood. She saw herself as a child, dressed in royal silks, playing in a grand courtyard with her parents watching over her. She remembered laughter, the warmth of the sun, the safety of her home. Then the scene shifted. A dark night, shouts of betrayal, a trusted general, one who had dined with them, protected them, turning against her father. Soldiers breaking through palace doors, fire consuming everything in sight. Her mother had clutched her tightly, whispering desperate words. "You must survive, Zuberi! Run, my child, run!" And then hands, cold, unyielding, had dragged her toward the river. A faceless figure had lifted her struggling body and cast her into the raging waters. Niara gasped, stumbling backward as the memories crashed over her. "It was him," she whispered, her hands shaking. "The man who betrayed my family. He is still alive." Prince Okai caught her before she could collapse. Who was he? Niara clenched her jaw, steadying herself. She had spent years lost, floating between life and death. But now she knew who she was, and she knew what she had to do. "He rules a neighboring land now," she said, her voice hardening, "and I will have my revenge." The revelation of Niara's identity spread through the kingdom like wildfire. She was no longer just a mysterious woman pulled from the river. She was the last surviving heir of a fallen throne. In the royal court, tension thickened like an approaching storm. Prince Okai stood at the center of it, torn between his loyalty to his kingdom and his growing love for Niara. If he helped her reclaim her lost land, he would risk war. But if he turned his back on her, he would be denying the very justice she deserved. "You saved me, Okai," Niara whispered to him in the shadows of the palace gardens. "Will you fight for me too?" Before he could answer, news arrived that sent a chill through the air. An envoy from a neighboring land had entered the palace. The same land ruled by the man from Niara's nightmares. The court welcomed the guest with forced smiles and wary eyes. He came dressed as a noble, his robes embroidered with gold, his demeanor calm and composed. But Niara knew him at once. The man who had thrown her into the river all those years ago, the one who had stolen her family's kingdom, stood before her, sipping wine as if he had not murdered an entire bloodline. Her hands curled into fists. The air around her grew cold. Prince Okai, sensing the storm within her, placed a steadying hand on her wrist. "Not yet," he whispered. "We need proof before the kingdom turns against him." But patience was never meant for those who had suffered as Niara had. That night, under the flickering torchlight of the grand hall, Niara stepped forward. "Do you remember me?" she asked, her voice ringing through the chamber. The noble turned, a polite smile on his lips, until he met her eyes. For a brief moment, something flickered there. Recognition. Fear. "You should be dead," he murmured before he could stop himself. Silence fell. The court froze. Prince Okai's hand went to his sword, and Niara, standing tall, let the weight of her return crash down upon the man who had once tried to erase her existence. "You took everything from me," she said, voice steady. "Now, I will take it back." The halls of the palace no longer echoed with whispers of doubt. Instead, they were filled with songs of triumph. The traitor had been exposed, justice had been served, and the woman once pulled from the river was now recognized as the rightful heir of a lost kingdom. Yet, standing before the golden throne, Niara, no, Princess Zuberi, felt the weight of her choices. The past called to her, but so did the future. The king and queen, who had once hesitated to accept her, now stood beside her with warmth in their eyes. "Fate brought you here for a reason," the queen said softly. "Perhaps not just to reclaim what was lost, but to find where you truly belong." Her gaze drifted to Prince Okai. Through every moment of uncertainty, every battle of the heart and mind, he had stood beside her, not as a prince, not as a warrior, but as a man who saw her for who she truly was. The people who once feared her now looked at her with admiration. They called her not a curse, but a blessing, a symbol of resilience, of survival. And so, beneath the open sky, surrounded by the kingdom that had become her home, she made her choice. The king and queen blessed her union with Okai, sealing a future where love and legacy could coexist. Days later, she found herself by the river once more, staring into its depths. The water was calm now, no longer whispering dark secrets, no longer pulling at her past. It had carried her away once, but now it reflected who she had become. She knelt by the edge, touching the cool surface, and breathed her true name for the last time. Princess Zuberi. The river did not take it from her this time. It carried it gently, as if to whisper back, "The lost one is lost no more."